Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the Martech Show. So glad you are tuning in for what's going to be, I promise you, an amazing episode. We're going to be talking about some of the 5 Martech trends for the decade ahead, with a particular lens on what this means for agencies and the agency perspective on this. My special guest is Jason Baldwin, who's the head of product management at WPP. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Scott.
So Jason and I have actually been working together on the 5 trends for the next 10 years of MarTech that originally presented last week at the MarTech conference for that opening keynote. And Jason and I have a pretty groovy document coming together here that will be available soon that dives into that more deeply. And then super excited to have as our sponsor for this episode, Alex Pelletier, who's the founder and CEO of Percuto. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Scott. Really glad to be here.
So yeah, we have got some great stuff to cover. So we're going to just dive right in. And if you have questions, please do feel free to use the Q&A option here in Zoom, and we'll be reserving the last little section of this show to be able to bring you into the conversation as well. So Jason, we started this project a few months ago of just sort of thinking like, okay, what are some of these like major trends that we already see happening in companies around MarTech, you know, not just specific technologies, but really even more so how like marketing teams and agencies and brands are sort of, you know, changing their capabilities, their approaches. So the 5 things we had, you know, really dug into was, you know, these no-code citizen creators, the wonderful world of platforms, networks, and marketplaces, the great app explosion, a shift from big data to big ops, and then, quite frankly, what ended up unifying a lot of this was the harmonizing of human and machine. So I know we're not going to be able to cover all of those here just in our, you know, brief 45 minutes here, but I figured maybe a good place for us to start is actually where we concluded, you know, on what AI means for the future of marketing. So I don't know. I mean, what was your, like, now that you know, we completed the writing of that project, like, what was your ultimate takeaway on the future of AI and marketers? Is it, you know, that they're going to just take the entire, take over marketing, or is this actually the start of a wonderful time to empower marketers?
I think it was really interesting just to reflect back on the work that we started. We kind of started off with those kind of 5 disparate areas that you kind of described at the beginning. And as we evolved the article and the thinking, actually, it was amazing to see how actually those all became, you know, part of almost the same thing, which is this idea of the augmented marketer. And AI obviously is going to play a key part of that particular the future of the work that the humans are doing now, and then augmented with AI and what the machines can help us do. And I really love this graph, the way that we kind of say, hey, actually, this is not about the machines taking over the work. It's actually about machines helping us do more of the work, and hopefully getting, you know, being able to do some more of those kind of mundane tasks that we've kind of seen previously. But it's interesting to reflect on the fact that AI was still kind of nascent in some of these decision or reason-based types of AI. You know, we're getting much better at the vision side of things and the text-based side of things and the audio kind of understanding, those types of things, but we've still got a long way to go yet in terms of, you know, can an AI actually reason on our behalf? And I think that's really the part where humans will still continue to do that. And just AI will actually help us make more of those decisions and be better at informing us about how we go ahead and make those decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I know like one of the things we looked at here is like, okay, when we think about where the strengths are going to be, you know, what machine learning and AI is going to be particularly effective at doing, you know, over these next few years, but also where humans are going to hold the upper hand for quite some time. you know, I know part of this project, yeah, you were able to really draw upon a number of, you know, the leaders throughout WPP who are right in the thick of all sides of this, from, you know, the data and AI element to, you know, of course, like, you know, the grander vision of like, you know, what does it mean to create, you know, really amazing and compelling marketing? Were there like a particular couple of things that you found in those conversations that you just like, okay, this is clearly going to be a human strength?
Yeah, it was really interesting to kind of get some external perspectives, and speak to some of the folks who are kind of working very closely with this. And it's evident that AI, things like generative GANs, are being able to kind of create art, in inverted commas, and we've kind of seen some examples of those pieces of art being created. And I think this is kind of one of the lessons that I learned as I went through writing, you know, helping to write the article, was basically that whilst machines can certainly do that, almost the instruction or the idea to have done that in the first place still came from the human. And so there's that kind of aspect in terms of, you know, original thought and original idea. And as part of marketing, one of the key things really is understanding the cultural context that a message is going to be landing in, and trying to treat that with an AI is nigh on impossible. I mean, you know, I don't know how you teach humor and those types of things, and you know, we might get to you know, you can see with GPT-3, you know, come through now that it's generating, you know, what is quite articulated, quite well thought out verses and so on and so forth, but is actually not really, it's kind of an iteration as opposed to a complete leap in terms of where an idea might take you. And so I think that's one of the areas where I think humans will continue to have the upper hand, and hopefully for a long time to come.
Yeah, so it seemed like certainly on the like, yeah, putting the context around creativity, and really that even like the initial, you know, the concept of what are we trying to achieve, who are we trying to influence, you know, what are we trying to say, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the other aspect of it that it seemed like, you know, I mean, looking at so many different examples, you know, where AI is being applied, is it did still feel like the individual use cases, as impressive as they are still relatively narrow. And one of the pieces that just feels like it's missing, you know, from that AI world is the orchestration above that, you know, of like all these different pieces, you know, that we can be optimizing the heck out of with machine learning, or we can be using generative AIs to, you know, create variations of content. But like orchestrating all these pieces together doesn't seem like that's anywhere in the short-term purview, you know, of what AI is going to be able to solve.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the bit that we looked at, and one of the areas that we touched on, was this idea of platforms and how those pieces can kind of be integrated, and recognizing that we're all part of a similar ecosystem. A lot of those AI elements will begin to be more readily available. At the moment, as you say, they're kind of quite narrow niche kind of use cases that we see a lot of these things happening in. So for example, something like you know, a Paint Shop Pro or something like that, that allows you know, previously a creator would spend a long time kind of cropping various pieces or various products out of particular shots that were made, and now there are a lot of those types of filters that have been created, or automated tools that are using an AI-based approach in terms of identifying the subjects in those particular images, centering images, cropping images correctly, so on and so forth. And so immediately you can see that the work that the machine's doing is kind of helping the human to kind of speed up that particular piece of work. And other areas where I've seen it also take place is really when looking for pieces of artwork, looking for similar pieces of artwork, and looking against a catalog of previous work. You know, somebody would previously have had to scroll through lots of files and so on and so forth, and now we have image recognition that allows us to tag those. We're still, a lot of those kind of pieces are still quite generic in terms of the types of outputs that you would get in terms of tagging pictures, and they're quite useful for finding traffic lights and that type of thing. But in terms of perhaps you're working on a particular brand and spotting a particular product in an image, that's again something that has to be augmented or has to be built on top of that particular piece of vision or AI that allows you to then detect that type of thing. And so these things are still kind of evolving. So it's not like I can just say, hey, crop out this particular wheel pattern for me and so on and so forth. It knows how to crop a car, but I think that's the bit where it will continue to evolve. But then there's still this entire chain of work that has to happen all the way through from our strategic thinking, through our planning, through our creative development, and eventually our execution, that is very much kind of held together still with pairs of hands. And I think this is where some of the work we touched on in the platform side of things, exposing a lot more of those capabilities via API, for example, will accelerate that side of things. But yeah, that's kind of my view on that piece.
Yeah, no, we will definitely dig into in a little bit here. Just sort of the implications here from an expansion of software being created by marketers and agencies. One more thing here, on this topic that we discussed this in a few places. Like I think the trend we were talking about, this shift from big data to big ops, was recognition that the past decade it was great to try and get our arms around this incredible influx of high velocity, high variance, complex data. But now, this next 10 years ahead really seems to be focusing more on the challenge of, okay, how do we leverage that and leverage it effectively and, quickly, in a lot of cases, feeding that into AI, particularly machine learning algorithms, to be able to make a lot of decisions and optimizations for us, rapidly. But I think one of the topics that, you'd really, a number of the folks you talked to, had raised there was, okay, as we start to become more and more dependent on feeding these data sources into these machine learning algorithms, for marketers, we're now starting to expose ourselves to a whole new kind of risk around really unintentionally, but still just as, potentially disastrously, problems resulting out of bias from this data, whether it's business bias or, social bias or any of these sorts of things. Like the machines don't have the intelligence to recognize that, the data is not good through that lens, and it feels like the judgment that needs to be layered on top of that, the governance that needs to be layered on top of that, is going to be an increasingly important part of what marketing, particularly marketing tech, marketing ops leadership is all about. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a big area for data and data ops going forward as we become more reliant on the algorithms and the models that are driving the automation for the work we're doing. There is ever more increasing risk in terms of, well, what might this machine do at perhaps some of the edge cases that we've not been able to test for perhaps. And recognizing where these data sets have come from, I think is going to be a huge piece of work in the future as well, to understand what was the underlying data set that actually went into creating this model that is now helping us to inform decisions. And I think that's where a lot more of our work will be as we begin to work with, it's not just the collection and execution against data against a rule set. We're now giving this to a machine that has been trained and is now making some decisions on our behalf. And therefore, we need to put some of those checks and balances in. Some of those can be automated, but at the moment we're still nascent in that space in terms of detection of bias. And I think that's where we'll see that some of those tools will gradually improve. But I think there will be ever more scrutiny on, well, what was the originating data set for this particular model, rather than I'll just pick up this model and build from here. It's going to be hey, how was this built? And I think that's where a lot of the skills will need to come for in the future of certainly from an agency perspective as well, is making sure that we have an understanding of how those models are created, educating our people in terms of, hey, it's not just a case of handing this over and hey, presto, we get some money out the back end of this now. Actually, there are some implications that we need to be very much aware of. And as we stack these things, the testing of the whole system becomes ever much more of a problem. And I think that's the piece that that we're going to need to focus on, especially over the next few years, where it'll probably get worse before it gets better in terms of us putting reliance in these systems. I don't know if you've seen the recent GPT-3, but it kind of was let loose on Reddit, and all of a sudden we've got some posts that perhaps we wouldn't like to have posted from a machine perspective. There was some good stuff, but there was also some bad stuff. So,
yeah, that was very, very scary, or overall just very eye-opening. So I'd like to bring Alex, into the chat here as well too. Alex, thank you for sponsoring this episode. You want to just take a moment here to tell folks a little bit about Percudo?
Sure, absolutely. So, well, essentially, Percudo is a agency that really focus on helping marketing operation leaders to really orchestrate with confidence all the customer experience, right? And the beauty is that we're doing this, leveraging both services and also technology ourselves, but we're also doing this while we're keeping the marketing operations team, sane, because typically these days it's hard. So we're trying to make it easy on them and on the whole team, actually. So that's our background. Been around for about 7 years now. So it's very interesting to see how things have evolved so far.
Yeah, we definitely have to talk a little bit here about, sort of the technology and services blend of things. So for listeners, the way sponsorship works here for the Martech Show, at least for this first season, is a sponsor picks a nonprofit to support on behalf of the show. And Alex, you and Percudo had sponsored this with supporting onelaptop.org. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tie this a little bit to a personal story. So last winter, before we were halted on travel, I was fortunate enough to go in Senegal in Africa, and as we go in developing countries, we see firsthand like how we take so many things for granted here in North America or in the more privileged place in the world. So to me, when I was time to figure out how can I help in some ways, was how can I bring what I like the most, which is technology, but how can I bring it to places or developing countries where to give they'll experience it first, and they'll have the opportunity to learn from it, touch it, see it for real, and then being able to continue to put their thinking so that at some point, they'll have exactly the same chances, at least from a technology standpoint, to get things started on their end. So it was really the rationale behind it. I think this is great. This is a great nonprofit that is supporting that cause across multiple developing countries.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And dear listeners, if you enjoy this show and you want to make a tip, please do feel free to make a donation to onelaptop.org as well. We'd appreciate it. All right. So while I've got the two of you here, I feel like there were a couple of these other trends that kind of blend together. And I know you see this, in your work. The first was this whole thing about, the no code movement, which to me, very broadly, like it even speaks to some of the things you were talking about, Jason, with like, this ability to say, oh, I would like this car to be cropped, out of a photo. Any of these things, whether it's from a programming perspective or increasingly also like a design or a content creation perspective, where it used to require like, a dedicated expert who was highly skilled in, how they would make that happen. And now this whole new range of tools. I mean, it's not taking all the cases, out, like we talked a little bit about, okay, there's a big difference between, a tool that, lets a non-technical user build a landing page and, building a state-of-the-art, like, online e-commerce business. There's quite a bit of daylight between those. But still, right, the steady movement of these tools that empower non-specialists to be able to do more and more with their own two hands that they used to require a specialist for. That feels like it's both changing the dynamics, within marketing departments, but also to a certain degree, like the dynamics of like marketing teams and agencies, and who are they looking to for what? And I don't know, either one of you want to start on that a bit?
Sure. I mean, I think the driving forces behind that is really the necessity for empowering and having those self-serve team, right? Because the marketer in itself, they think and they actually get the creativity out, and they really want to make sure they can express it. And whenever you need to add some layer in that expression, this is really where you start to slow down the process. So having the necessity of empowering them, making sure that they have their tools, they can control, they can actually use that creativity at first. And I think this is really where we're seeing this energy, or this force is driving towards more low code or no code. And those solutions are really both an answer from like a need coming from the marketer, but also it's an enhancement of the technology. Like we were not able to do that a couple of years back. Now we're able because the tech is there. And this is really what's going to continue, I believe, to drive this push towards more independence or more autonomy from the marketer standpoint. And I feel the agency role here is really to kind of support and put the infrastructure to make sure that those teams are able to do that. They really have the demand, they have the need. That our role is really, how can we help you leverage either technology that is existing in your stack, or new technology or new tools, in order to enable and empower those self-serve station, if I could say.
Yeah, I think I'd agree, Alex. It's one of those things that is, drives a huge amount of efficiency. So if you're able to, as you've rightly depicted on this graph, low end use cases, if we could pick those off, then all of a sudden you no longer need an entire team to be doing these things. You need an afternoon of somebody's time working with an interface to do them. And if you look at things like even down at some of the lower end types of things, in terms of the way code is kind of cut today in the data space, you look at the Jupyter Notebook as a humble tool, and what a simple kind of idea, but actually it really has allowed code to come life, and that's an abstraction away from having to stand up your own server, stand up your own environment, so on and so forth. And then we kind of go all the way to the top end, where we've got highly kind of configured user interfaces, and beginning to bring in a collections of tools that begin to work together. And I think this is the bit where the idea of going from the low end use cases, which are perhaps restricted to a single platform or system, these mid-range use cases need a combination of those today, but we will see those again abstracted away, and it becomes a single kind of task as opposed to a complete workflow that exists today. And I think that's where a lot of agencies are kind of focused, is looking at their workflow, looking at the tools that are involved in that workflow, and then understanding, hey, is there something in this space that we're able to introduce a no code, or actually automate a few of these steps, so that we're able to get away from some of these lower use cases and get to the point of really being able to get some of those ideas out and out faster. And I think that's kind of where a lot of this will trend.
So that does seem like a good segue here to, we had the third trend, in the opus that we've been working on there, Jason, was, this great app explosion, which, for those who follow, the MarTech show, the MarTech conference, you might think of the great app explosion as, oh, that crazy MarTech landscape. And indeed, that's part of it. But it really is actually the tiniest piece, of what's really become a universal phenomenon. In the report we, had quoted some research from IDC that, they were estimating that by 2023, just a few years from now, there would be something like 500 million different apps, that have been created and deployed using the cloud, and of course, not all of these are going to be like, commercially packaged solutions. In fact, probably most of them will not be, there'll be these more specialized and custom solutions. But still, it's this amazing app explosion. And I thought where we might take our discussion today is, having the two of you on the show, Alex, you and I have chatted before how like your agency, right, as a services business, has really started to invest in the direction of building some of your own apps and some of your own software, and are you a services business or a software business, and how you view that? And then with you, Jason, we've got the head of product management, from WPP, right, the world's largest, agency conglomerate here. I'd love to just get, your initial perspectives on like, what does this mean for agencies to be in the software business to a certain degree?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think it's a great question. Like I'm torn every day. Like what are we? Like are we a service? Are we a software company? And I think there's, you could look at it from like a revenue perspective. You could look at it at how you deploy your solution. But I think it's really important to realize that it's not a choice anymore. It's not, you don't have to be one or the other. Like by necessity, our job to optimize the work for our customer is really to look at what piece of the process, what things could be actually automated, like Jason was saying, because if we don't do that, if we don't think about that ourselves, like next company or next innovation is going to take that work away, because there's a lot of things that we do today now automatically that were done by human before, and now it's continuing to evolve in that direction. And for us, we grew a couple of products to help our own delivery of our services, but we put some of those into the market as well, because the demand was not just for us being better at how we deliver our service, but it was like real customer needs. Like we need to improve those processes, we need to have more people and stuff like that. And this is really, really what drives us to push in that direction. And now the way I look at the future is like we'll definitely going to be blended. Like I don't foresee like a service agency, surviving the growth without having those component of technology, being able to offer them to their customer. Whether they do it internally or whether they offer it to the market, it's really, really going to be part of the model. Otherwise, it's just, you're going to be left behind for sure.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's two angles really for this for me from a software company perspective, and whether agencies should be in this space or not. I agree that they wholeheartedly have to be. There's two angles to that. One is service the internal set of capabilities that you need to be able to run an agency. So what are the types of tools that you need that are outside of the ecosystem that exists today? Scott, there's over 8,000 pieces of software out there that help us do our jobs today, or perhaps hinder in some cases with that number, right? But in order to, not one of those platforms does everything. And so that's the challenge, is in order to stitch a number of these different experiences together, you then have to, even from a workflow perspective, have software to help you. There's no way that you can cope with the volume, the demand, the complexity sometimes that only software can help you solve. And so that's where a lot of my particular role is looking at those internal software development teams and helping to kind of curate a set of capabilities across our network, and how do we develop and where are we developing. And I think that's the key piece, is just understanding, well, where to develop. As I say, there's 8,000 solutions out there today, and if you can't find one in that mix, it means must have a really unique problem. It's either that, or you're not willing to perhaps pay for the service, or perhaps you need to move faster in a particular way for a particular client, or you've got a legacy situation you're perhaps dealing with. And so all of these things are software challenges, and this is absolutely why agencies, I think, have to have a certain level of software capability. If you are a large agency, you absolutely need to have a development team that can help you solve some of those problems. If you're a smaller agency, then that's maybe a little bit more of a challenge in terms of actually how can I perhaps use more of these no-code type solutions that are coming down the line, so that I don't have to get involved in the coding itself. The other angle I'd like to kind of think through is also the types of applications that we're delivering as experiences to customers. And this is certainly an area where we've had display advertising, we've had billboard advertising, so on and so forth, generally static, generally image-based or video-based, so on and so forth. But now with the increasing levels of interaction that apps now can afford us, and in the payload sizes that we're able to use, and the devices that are getting, the iPhone 12 just came out, so on and so forth, we see these tripling, doubling of capabilities in those devices, means that we can create ever more involving and engaging applications for our clients to use. And they probably won't even see them, or our clients to use. They probably don't even see them as apps. They see them as oh, this is an amazing interactive experience. What do you mean I can swipe here and I can touch this? And it's taken me down this path, which started perhaps as a display ad, but now I'm kind of into getting more out of this brand. And I think that's the other side of where marketing is becoming more and more a software type industry in terms of the experiences that we're also developing.
Yeah, I mean, like where we started in this discussion around, you know, AI and why, yeah, there's actually not a terrible threat to the need for humans in marketing anytime soon. Partly because there's just so much to be done, and it feels like, in particular, you know, having been in the intersection of marketing and tech for many. Well, let's just say a long time. You know, for when I started with that, right, it was really these like two different ends of you know, the professional spectrum of, you know, I mean, software, you know, and sort of marketing creativity. They weren't even really right considered adjacent, you know. But yeah, what you're talking about there, Jason, of like, you know, this software being an actual, like a canvas, a vehicle by which now, you know, we have this ability to create incredibly new kinds of creative experiences. Like, how are you seeing that evolution of, you know, the creative talents within marketing really waking up and collaborating, you know, with the right software talent to push the envelope of what's possible?
Well, I mean, we're seeing this like with customers, like they always challenge us with new ideas and new concept that they want to bring. I think the role here is really to bridge that gap, like from the ideation standpoint, and how are you going to be able to achieve or the results that you're looking to get is really where, because we have more of that tech perspective, that we're able to actually kind of make the two speak together. Because at the end of the day, it's still a conversation that needs to happen with a business need, with a vision. Then the solution comes from like some of the technology, some of the code or not code that exists out there to make it happen. But it's really bridging that gap, I feel, where the value and where the magic happen at that moment, where we combine those cells, and not cells, but I mean software and actually creativity. So
Great. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, go
Nope.
ahead, Jason.
No, I was going to say I completely agree. I think this is where, you know, the experiences that people are demanding now are require this type of capability to be in an agency, and people expect this type of interaction now and expect to be able to take things to the next level. And so, yeah, I would agree.
Cool. Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come in here from the live studio audience. I just love saying live studio audience, even though it's just like folks who have logged in over Zoom, but you know, it sounds better. So thank you. Heidi and Anand, two great questions here. I've gone ahead and promoted you to, ooh, hey, where's my cursor, man? Ah, there we are. Yeah, to be on the panel here if you'd like. Feel free to jump in if you want to just ask your question directly. Heidi, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Sorry, no video on this one. But my question, is that okay? Sorry about that. I wasn't prepared.
The voice is good.
Casual Friday. Okay, sorry. Here's my question. I love this idea of what has to change when it comes to AI and no code apps is the fact that what people do has to change as marketers. My question is that, you know, if you're a marketer looking, oftentimes you're siloed in one department. By doing this and requiring a data set, don't we actually have to then step back and use the Peter Drucker approach that marketing needs to be integrated across the organization so that we actually have good content, good data that works together, and then be able to understand what's happening with our customer base, and then later to take the intent content, which Jeff George, formerly of Yext, says comes outside of your organization, to make sure that it's reliable, it's quality, it has no biases.
I mean, I think having quality data is a prerequisite. I mean, you can't even imagine building additional experiences, like whether it's driven by AI or even, you know, to some extent some human. But I think making sure that you have that cohesive harmony between all of your sources of information, data, whether it's internal or external as an additional input, I think will be the real solid foundation that you'll need to make sure that you're getting your project off the ground. even if they're a marketing project, they need to rely on this overall infrastructure that you have across your company. So I don't think you can really get away alone in a silo. I think it's important to have that. That being said, doesn't mean that you have the need for a 3-year project to get things all sorted. I think you can get things started a bit off the ground to test and validate, some of your assumption, and then once you feel that you're getting to that direction, you make sure that you have that overall cohesive data infrastructure for your source of your input there.
So Alexander, I would like to just jump in. I hope you don't mind, Scott, that I have a follow-on to that. So here's
take it.
I've worked in companies that I wouldn't even say they were legacy systems. I call them dinosaur systems. So, but if you work in at least in my experience, companies like, you have the finance has their data, the marketing has their data, there's other data that I get from outside. How do I get this all to work together internally so that I actually can start doing that modeling, right? For example, one of the things I've become interested in the past year is how do I structure my content so that I can add voice to it, so that I get those interactive experiences that Jason is talking about, right? Because I need to be able to have take the questions from my audience, be able to respond. I needed to tie to other information that might be in a different part of the organization. For example, like goes to that know-how, right? Somebody in, maybe I have a subject matter expert in operations who can explain how to put something together, and a very solid example would be, I get out a Kia product, how do I do it?
Heidi, I think we've uncovered the whole of what big data ops is kind of all about. And where I've seen it work well in the past is by taking a hypothesis and then looking to try and prove out that hypothesis. So perhaps don't invest in the whole, kind of capture every piece of data, so on and so forth. I think it is possible to work at a hypothesis level first, do the proof of concept that sits behind that, and then look to productionize it somehow. And I think that will save you hopefully a lot of time, but also you've injected some of the human intuition as opposed to just throwing all the data into it and letting a machine make a decision from that point onwards. I think that's the bit there where, if you're going to go whole hog into that environment, then that becomes a challenge in terms of, well, what are the decisions that are then subsequently made, and you're unable to kind of track perhaps where bias was introduced and so on and so forth. The only other piece that I would kind of say here is that the data governance is a seriously rated kind of piece of work that needs to happen in a business. It's good to understand where your data comes from, have that as part of a catalog, and track those sources, understand where, what the permissions are on those types of things, and you've got to be able to have that as part of your data lineage, and that needs to be enforced through data governance. So sort of a number of kind of consulting type acronyms at you there, but I think those are a few areas that if you are looking to try and do this, start with a hypothesis, begin the introduction of data governance, and then you can iterate from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Heidi. I think we've got time for one more question here. Anand, are you tuned in?
I am. Let's see. Can I do the video here? I was actually wanting to be on the video, but hey, you know what? That's all good. Great, Jason, Alexander, Scott, great discussion today. I really enjoyed it. I've had the benefit of working with agencies, consultancies, and product folk, companies, even built a few on a couple of fronts. And I feel like today for agencies and consultancies to truly scale or break sort of the growth glass ceiling that exists today, you really do have to productize some of your services or do develop products. So I really, there had a lot of affinity for the conversation toward the end there. How does corporate development or acquisition conversations start to play a role in your growth for each of you?
Maybe Jason, you're in a better position than I am to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean that's traditionally
been. You'll get there soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's from the other end point.
Yeah, it's kind of the Martech show, by the way, has a very limited corporate development budget, and we spent it all on coffee this morning. So, yeah, definitely turn this over to Jason.
I didn't get my coffee this morning, Scott. I'll just put that out there. Yeah, I think WPP has traditionally grown through acquisition, and that's been a key part of our kind of strategy to continue, and we will continue to do that, where we see either unique ways of working or unique creative talent and kind of unique pieces of technology that fit with our kind of longer term strategy of helping to solve some of the challenges we have for clients. We will continually be looking, and we'll continue down that path. I think part of the piece that we are beginning to, as you've seen recently, there's been some consolidations and so on and so forth, the MLY&R, Wyndham & Thompson, J. Wolfs, and so on and so forth. And so that's a continual evolution of our business, and that's really a reflection on how we scale for our clients. It's what our clients are ultimately asking us to be able to serve them better. And so in essence, it's done through that lens. How can we do that in a more efficient way, and deliver with some of the world's best technology and best talent for those particular clients. And so I'm not sure if I've answered your question in terms of productization, but this is, do you then become the kind of the ubiquitous kind of marketing agency that has an answer for everything? And I think that's also part of the challenge in terms of how do we shape the propositions that we put into our market in such a way that they're relevant, and they are genuinely solving proper marketing needs and requirements. I think that the challenge is the breadth of marketing, as you've kind of rightly put, consultancies, our role as marketers has expanded hugely. No longer are we there just to produce an ad. We're now here to help you promote your business, understand your business model, create new markets for you. There's a huge amount that we get involved in nowadays in terms of even helping people re-architect from an IT kind of perspective. And so I'm not sure if I've answered your question quite fully there, but hopefully you get a size and the scale of perhaps the agencies that I particularly work with. But the way in which we like to think about productizing is to solve particular client and vertical needs. So that's generally how we kind of work.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think you did a great job of answering a very broad question. And maybe if I may take the opportunity, like, how are you thinking of bringing products in that magnify the productivity of your teams or talent? Maybe that's a better way of kind of like, how are you thinking about it, or how are you thinking about that in within the WPP ecosystem?
Yeah, I guess that's speaking quite a lot to the role that I currently have, which is how do we make decisions between the types of products that we want as part of our internal technology stack, and where are we looking to partner with others? We have very strong partnerships with some of the major players in the market. I think we're one of the largest Adobe consumers from a creative suite perspective, for example. And so, I would never look at trying to recreate the Adobe suite, for example. That's just not part of why the products exist. Really, we're there to currently plug the gaps and also provide an innovative edge. So one of the philosophies that we have within WPP is this idea of distributed innovation. We allow a lot of our creators to actually come up with the solutions, get them into market, provide that solution, and then my role is actually around how do I then make sure that scales for the rest of the organization. So seeing something that's working well and as a strategy, and then kind of helping to invest and elevate that to the rest of the organization. And it's through those that we often find the right types of internal product to promote versus the external ones that we would never look to recreate.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Anand. I know we are coming up to the end of our time, but I wanted to give both Alex and Jason, kind of the final word to, step back and say, all right, even forgetting these 5 trends as they got framed, like, what are you most excited about over these next few years, at the intersection of marketing and technology?
I mean, from my perspective, is the endless possibilities. Like we don't know what, we can project, we can think about where things will be, but ultimately once we'll be experiencing, this is when we're really going to have like the feel about it. So what I mean by that is I see that there's so much possibilities, there's so much opportunities to continue to solve, you know, customer marketer challenges. And I think this is what really, really excites me, because it's you know, it's open. There's no limitation. Whatever, any challenge will be thrown at us, we'll figure out whether it's going to be service, whether it's going to be technology, whether it's going to be AI, we'll be able to solve those marketers' problems. So I think for me, it's the endless possibilities and solutions that are in front of us that we'll be able to use and leverage for the customers at the end. So it's really, really where I'm at.
I'd echo that. I think the marketing landscape as it stands today is probably the most diverse and most creative that it has ever been. And I only ever see that trajectory going forward in terms of just some of the awesome stuff that gets produced by marketing teams and agencies. And it's really part of the reason why I'm part of this industry, is because it is such a fast moving, fast paced. It can be daunting at times, but then, you know, I find that sometimes also drives some of the best solutions. Just super pumped to be working in MarTech.
Awesome. Well, Jason, Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. Heidi and Anand, thank you so much for joining in with your questions. Our next episode will be recorded 1 week from today, October 23rd, 11 a.m. Eastern. Jim Yule, who's one of the pioneers of the Agile marketing movement, has actually just recently published a great new book, The 6 Disciplines of Agile Marketing. So of course, for episode number 6, we will dive into the 6 disciplines of Agile marketing. Look forward to seeing you then and there. In the meantime, have a great week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.